The sky was grey, and the city seemed trapped in a kind of resigned silence. The wind blew through the wide streets of the financial district, carrying dry leaves that swirled in eddies around luxury cars parked along impeccable sidewalks. The clock in the square read 12:05. It was lunchtime. Men in suits walked hurriedly to elegant restaurants, all engrossed in their own predictable routines. And it was in that seemingly ordinary scene that something extraordinary began to happen. The millionaire stepped out of his armored car, his face concealed behind dark sunglasses. He was known to everyone there, but few dared to approach him. His name adorned hospital plaques, charitable foundations, and even museums, but almost no one knew his voice, much less the sound of his laughter, because he didn't laugh. Not anymore. His name was Arthur Lamont, 56 years old, owner of a fortune amassed in technology and real estate. His appearance was impeccable. Tailored suit, silver hair combed back, hands always clean but empty. He wore no wedding ring, had no children, answered to no one. Some said he was an admirable man, others that he was a tragic one. The truth, however, no one knew. No one dared to ask. Arthur entered a French restaurant where he always ate at the same time. He didn't speak to the waiters. He sat at the same table, he ate the same dish, and he left without looking around. It was a precise ritual, almost like a defense mechanism against the chaos of life. But that day he stopped. The reason? A boy sitting on the sidewalk across the street. He was hunched over, hugging his knees. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just there, staring intently into the restaurant as if he could see something beyond the glass walls, as if he were waiting for someone who never came. Arthur noticed the boy's large, dark, attentive eyes, and it disarmed him. There was something familiar in that gaze, something that pierced him like a forgotten memory tucked away in the back of a drawer. On impulse, or perhaps guided by something greater, Arthur asked for an extra dish to be prepared. He had it packed up. He left the restaurant without eating and crossed the street, to everyone's astonishment. The boy looked at him but said nothing. He just sat there, with a calmness uncommon for street children. Arthur placed the package in his hands and said in a hoarse voice, "It's chicken with potatoes, it's hot. Eat slowly." The boy held the food with reverence. He opened the package carefully and began to eat as if it were a royal banquet. And as he ate, he started to sing. His voice was soft, unaffected, fearless. He sang as if speaking to the sky, and Arthur froze. That song was the lullaby he used to sing to his daughter, the one he lost 20 years ago. The sounds came like stabs to his chest. Each note tore out a memory. The pink bedroom, the laughter echoing down the stairs, the notes left on his office door, and finally, the hospital, the IV drip, the goodbye. Arthur fell to his knees, literally, on the sidewalk in front of the boy. People started to stare, but he didn't care. His eyes were glassy. The entire world had vanished. All that remained was that boy and that voice, a voice that broke through 2 decades of silent grief. "How do you know that song?" Arthur asked, his eyes welling with tears. The boy stopped chewing. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and answered, "She taught me." "Who?" "The lady in my dreams. She visits me sometimes. She says my name is important, and she sings that song to help me sleep when I'm hungry." Arthur stood still. Something in his soul tore apart. This was no mere coincidence. It was supernatural. It was a call. It was an answer. The boy's name was Samuel. He was 7 years old. He had been living on the streets for 4 years, ever since the orphanage burned down and he vanished from the records, never adopted, never sought after, invisible to the world, but not to Arthur. He took Samuel to a hotel. He ordered clothes, a bath, a room with warm lights. That night Arthur didn't sleep. He sat in an armchair, watching Samuel sleep, as if gazing at a star fallen from the sky. When the boy rolled over and murmured the song again, the millionaire began to cry, silently, like someone crying within, like someone finally recognizing a forgotten sound from their own heart. The next morning, Arthur called lawyers, doctors, psychologists, but he also called the only person he still spoke to honestly, his older sister, Helena. She was the only one who had known his daughter, the only one who had heard the song being created, back at the old piano in the countryside house. When Helena arrived, she looked at Samuel for 2 minutes and sat down, overwhelmed. "It's her," she said, her voice breaking. Arthur didn't understand. "What?" "This child. He has the same eyes, the same calmness, and the same song. "This isn't chance, Arthur. It's God." At that moment, the man who dominated the financial market felt small before something greater, something sacred, something eternal. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew he couldn't ignore what was before him. And so began a journey that would change everything. A journey that wasn't just about documents, processes, or money, but faith, forgiveness, redemption, and something Arthur thought he had lost forever: love. In the days that followed, Arthur kept Samuel close, not out of obligation or pity, but because he felt something inside him was finally being mended. It was as if each of the boy's gestures patched an old crack. The way he looked at simple things, as if discovering the world for the first time, reminded Arthur of everything he had left behind. He had forgotten how to see beauty in breakfast, in leaves dancing with the wind, in the sound of a children's song echoing through the room. But there was also fear. Arthur was a man marked by loss. He had buried his wife, killed in a car accident, and his daughter, his only daughter, had passed after a relentless illness that took not only her life but his laughter, his faith, and his will to remain among the living. He survived. That was all, surrounded by luxury, but drowning in silence. And now there was Samuel, with his gentle presence, his hunger for affection, his innocence that invaded without asking permission, and with that song that echoed in every corner of the house, like a kind ghost. On the third night after dinner, Samuel tugged Arthur by the hand. He led him to the piano at the end of the hallway. He sat on the worn wooden bench and began to play, with trembling notes, the same melody he sang. Arthur clutched his chest. It wasn't possible. Samuel couldn't read music. He had never had lessons, but he played with enough precision to ignite every dormant memory. "She taught me this too," the boy said, without taking his eyes off the keys. "She smiles when I play." "Who, Samuel?" Arthur asked, almost whispering. "The lady who shines. The one who comes when I'm really scared. She calls me Little Ray of Sunshine." Arthur felt his legs weaken. That was the nickname his daughter used for him. The same one she used in old letters he still kept locked in a safe. The next morning, Arthur took Samuel to the cemetery. He said nothing. He just walked with him to his daughter's grave. Samuel stopped in front of the tombstone. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He simply placed his hand on the cold stone and said, "I told her I'd find you." Arthur knelt right there, hands covering his eyes, broken inside. That moment was what he didn't know he needed. It was as if his daughter were sending him a message from heaven, as if she were saying, "You can still love. You can still start again." The adoption wasn't a simple process. Missing documents, lack of records, a murky past. But Arthur moved mountains. He hired detectives, traced everything, discovered that Samuel was the son of a woman who died in the orphanage fire, but he wasn't her only child. He had a missing sister, possibly alive. This launched Arthur into a new mission. While the legal adoption process moved forward, he began searching for clues about the missing girl. And with every step in this investigation, he felt less like a businessman and more like a father. His days became different. He woke with purpose. He started working less, smiling more, preparing breakfast, things he had never done. Samuel, meanwhile, filled the empty spaces of the house with drawings, music, and a silence full of presence. He never demanded anything, never threw tantrums. He simply existed as an unexpected miracle, as someone who, from the womb, knew they would have to wait a long time to be loved, but who still chose to love first. On a rainy afternoon, Arthur received a call from the private detective. They had found a young girl living in a makeshift shelter in the countryside. She was 9 years old. Her name was Luna, and her story was almost unbelievable. She had been found wandering alone, without documents, only with an old bracelet on her wrist, a children's bracelet with the letter S engraved on it. Arthur didn't waste time. He took Samuel by the hand, got in the car, and drove for 4 hours straight. They arrived at the shelter as night fell. There was a smell of mold, dim lights, and children's voices in the background. The director, an elderly woman with tired eyes, received them with surprise. Upon seeing Samuel, her eyes filled with tears. "He came back," she said, moved. She never stopped saying he would come for her. Luna was sitting at the back of the room, holding a tattered notebook. Her hair was tied in 2 uneven braids. When she saw Samuel, she ran, but she didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just hugged him as if catching her breath after a shipwreck. Samuel whispered something in her ear, Luna then looked at Arthur, as if recognizing a face from a dream, and said, "You're the man from the song." Arthur froze. That sentence didn't make sense, but Luna explained with simple words, "I dreamed of you. You were always sad, but the song woke you up." They returned home that same night, and on the way, Samuel fell asleep in the back seat with his head in Luna's lap. Arthur drove in silence, but with teary eyes. He felt something extraordinary was being fulfilled, as if the pieces of a puzzle were being assembled by an invisible hand. Days later, Arthur registered both as his adopted children. The press found out, as expected. Headlines exploded. Millionaire adopts 2 street children. Tragedy turns to redemption. But Arthur didn't want interviews or speeches. He just wanted to live. Weeks passed, then months. The once silent house became a home. There were voices, dirty dishes, laughter, and there were nights when they all lay on the living room floor to watch old movies, like a family that had always existed, but had only now found each other. And even on the difficult days, when fear returned, when the past knocked at the door, Arthur learned to breathe deeply and remember the song, that same melody that had crossed decades, overcome grief, and united souls. The song he now heard, not with pain, but with gratitude. Time passed like a gentle breeze over a fogged window. Arthur learned to live with the small details of daily life. He discovered that happiness, in fact, was made of simple rituals. Listening to Samuel talk about recess, helping Luna draw an imaginary dress, cooking heart-shaped pancakes, and falling asleep to the soundtrack of laughter in the hallway. That was life. Not the one he had planned, but the one God had given back to him. And yet there was one last knot in his throat, something he still couldn't untie. He hadn't told the children everything. They knew his daughter had died. They knew the song was a spiritual connection, but they didn't know about the guilt. The true guilt Arthur had carried for years, and it came back with force the day Samuel asked a seemingly simple question. "Dad, why did you stop singing?" Arthur froze. They were sitting in the garden, watching the trees sway in the wind. The sky had a golden hue of late afternoon, and Luna was making daisy necklaces, but that question pierced the beauty of the moment like a silent arrow. He took a deep breath, ran his hand through his hair, and began to tell, without embellishments, without excuses. He said his daughter died while he was in a meeting, that the phone rang but he asked not to be interrupted, that the hospital called once, twice, 3 times, and only on the 4th did he answer. But it was too late. "She passed without hearing me sing one last time," he said, his voice breaking, "and since then I silenced my soul." Samuel didn't respond. He just held his hand. Luna approached and rested her head on his shoulder, and there they stayed, the 3 of them, in silence, until the boy began to sing, softly, and this time Arthur joined him. The melody came out trembling, weak, but it was a start. That night, Arthur felt something different. A kind of peace that didn't come from the absence of pain, but from accepting his own pain, as if singing again allowed his daughter's memory to live not as a burden, but as a light. It was in this climate of reconciliation that they decided to travel. Luna wanted to see the sea. Samuel had never seen mountains. Arthur rented a rustic house, surrounded by pine trees, with a view of a valley that opened like a living painting. There they walked barefoot, made bonfires, told stories under the stars. On one of those nights, Luna woke in the middle of the night and found Arthur sitting on the porch, looking at the sky. She approached slowly, as if respecting the sacred silence of the moment. She sat beside him and asked, "Do you think she's watching us now?" Arthur looked up. The stars seemed to twinkle gently. "I think so, daughter, and I think she's smiling." "Do you think she'd choose me as her sister?" Arthur smiled tenderly. "She'd choose you before I even understood what that meant." Luna then pulled something from her pocket, a smooth white pebble she had found by the riverbank. "I'll leave this pebble here for her, so she knows I'm taking good care of Dad." The next morning, Samuel was drawing in the living room when Arthur approached with an old envelope in his hands. "I want to show you something," he said. It was a letter, handwritten on paper yellowed by time. "This was the last letter my daughter wrote to me. I found it months later, in a notebook hidden among her books." Samuel took the letter carefully. He read it silently, moving his lips with focus. When he finished, he looked up with tears held back. "She was talking about me," he said. "She said I'd come one day, didn't she?" Arthur nodded, his eyes welling up. The letter read, "Dad, if you ever find a child with my song in their heart, take good care of them. It might be my way of coming back." It was impossible to deny. It was as if fate had woven itself with invisible threads, moved by a father's silent tears. And now he was being given the chance he hadn't had, to love again, to love anew, but more deeply, without distractions, without excuses. The months turned into a year. Life gained rhythm, texture, color. Samuel began composing small songs on the piano. Luna started painting portraits of people she saw in dreams. One of them, astonishingly, was of Arthur's daughter. The resemblance was uncanny. He hung the painting at the entrance of the house, like a silent blessing. On a sunny Sunday, they decided to have a picnic in the city's central park. They brought fruit, juice, a blue blanket, and Arthur's old portable radio. As the three ate, laughed, and ran among the trees, an elderly woman approached. She wore a beige dress and a pearl necklace, her eyes fixed on Samuel. She stopped, touched her chest with her hand, and began to cry. Arthur stood, concerned. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She nodded, tears streaming. "I'm sorry. It's just this child. He looks so much like my grandson." Arthur approached, curious. The woman then explained. Her son had died in an orphanage fire years ago. She never knew what happened to his wife. She only knew they had two small children. Since then, she had searched for her grandchildren without success. Arthur felt a chill. "Your son, was his name Daniel by chance?" The woman paled. "Yes. Did you know him?" "No. But your grandchildren are here." He pointed to Samuel and Luna. The reunion was silent, profound. The grandmother hugged them as if holding a miracle. And once again, Arthur understood. This was the purpose. This was the mission. Not just to save a life, but to restore a lineage, to bring back what time had erased. They didn't break ties. Arthur remained their father. But now the grandparents were present. There were more hugs, more stories, more roots. And on a Saturday night, as everyone sat around the table for a special dinner, Samuel picked up the guitar and began to play. It was the song, the same one, but this time with new verses. Luna joined in with her sweet voice. Arthur moved, closed his eyes and sang, fully, with a clean soul. And there, in that room full of laughter, scents and warm light, the miracle was understood. A man who had been silent for years was now singing. A child who had been lost was now drawing the future. And a girl who dreamed of hugs was now receiving them without fear. Time, once Arthur's relentless enemy, became a gentle ally. The days were no longer long and dragging, but passed with lightness, filled with a new routine, blending love and redemption. The once cold mansion, where silence reigned supreme, now pulsed with life. Sounds of laughter, piano notes, conversations at the foot of the stairs, and small footsteps running down the main hallway. It was as if the house had begun to breathe again. And even with all this transformation, Arthur continued to find ways to honor the past without letting it weigh on the present. He created a small memory room, where he placed photos of his daughter, old letters, and even the first doll he had bought for her. Samuel and Luna visited this place often, not as if visiting a grave, but as if talking to someone dear who had never truly left. It was Luna who had the idea. One afternoon she entered the memory room with a small notebook in hand and said, "I want to write a song for her, a new one that speaks of what we're living now." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. He sat beside her, and together they began crafting simple but soulful verses. Samuel, with his keen ear, added chords on the piano, and so the three spent days composing a new melody named "We Came Home." The song spoke of reunions, second chances, and love that survives even after death. When the song was finished, Luna insisted they record a video. Arthur hesitated. He had never exposed himself publicly in such an intimate way. But she convinced him with an argument impossible to counter. If other people hear this song, maybe they'll remember they can still love. The video was recorded simply, the three of them in the garden, with the sunset in the background. Samuel at the piano, Luna singing with her eyes closed, and Arthur beside them holding their hands with a shy but genuine smile. They posted the video without expectations, but within hours, thousands had watched it. Comments poured in from around the world. Parents who reunited with their children, mothers who had lost children, lonely men who cried hearing the melody. This song reminded me I can still try. After years, I hugged my father for the first time. This family gave me hope. Arthur hadn't expected any of this, but he understood that when a story touches the heavens, it finds mysterious paths to touch hearts on earth. This wasn't fame. It was a mission. That same week, he was invited to speak at an orphanage. The director had seen the video and said the children asked every day if the song man would visit them. Samuel and Luna were thrilled with the idea. They prepared drawings to give out, and Luna decided to bring the bracelet with the letter S to show the children that signs exist, and that sometimes the impossible is just waiting for us to believe. The visit to the orphanage was a turning point, not for the impact Arthur had on the children, but for what those children did to him. Seeing those eyes longing for affection, those hands reaching for a hug, that need mixed with hope, it reignited a fire in his heart. He left determined to create something bigger, an institute, not just a shelter but a home, a place where children weren't just taken in, but loved as sons and daughters. The project came to life in a few months. Samuel chose the name Song House, and Luna designed the logo, a house with windows shaped like musical notes. Arthur invested everything, money, time, soul. He hired the best professionals. He ensured every child had a colorful room, a name chosen by themselves, and the chance to learn art, painting, music, dance, not just to entertain, but to heal. At the opening, journalists, businessmen, and officials were present, but the most striking moment was when Samuel took the makeshift stage, looked at the audience, and said, "I was an invisible child. Today, I'm a son, and I want everyone here to feel that way too." Applause, tears, silence, a silence full of meaning. After the opening, Arthur returned home with his children. He sat on the couch, exhausted but fulfilled. It was as if, finally, the circle was complete. But there was still a gift waiting for him. That same night, Luna appeared with a small box in her hands. She handed it to him without a word. Inside was a small pendant with the inscription, "You are the home." It was simple, but heavy as an altar. Arthur couldn't hold back his tears. "You built more than a house, Dad," she said. "You built a shelter in us." The next morning, Arthur did something he had never done in his life. He woke early, took an old typewriter from the attic, and began writing a letter, addressed to his daughter. Each word was a liberation. He told her everything, about the grief, the guilt meeting Samuel, Luna's arrival, the dreams, the song, and he ended by saying, "You saved me, my girl. You taught me that love is stronger than absence, that pain can bloom, that singing is resurrection." He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and went to the garden. There, at the foot of the tree where he had buried his daughter's ashes, he placed the envelope with a white flower, and then he smiled. For the first time, a smile that wasn't restrained, formal, or forced. It was the smile of a man reconciled with time, with God, with himself. Later, Samuel ran through the house looking for Arthur. He wanted to show him the new song he had finished. He found his father in the office, handling some documents. But something caught the boy's attention. On the desk was a new will being drafted. Arthur looked up, saw the boy, and smiled. "I'm registering what's yours," he said. "The house, the institute, my name, because you are my legacy, my future." Samuel threw himself into his arms. That night, as they dined, Luna raised a glass of grape juice in a toast, "To the love that found us." And Arthur, with teary eyes, replied, "To the song that woke us." Time continued to blow its seasons over that new family, like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Summer arrived, bringing not only warmth and lazy afternoons, but also the sense that something grand was coming. Luna grew with the elegance of flowers that don't need applause to bloom, and Samuel discovered in the piano a living extension of his soul. Arthur, for his part, had set aside million-dollar contracts, endless meetings, and political dinners. Now his days belonged to them, and to something even greater than all of them, the gift of presence. One morning, as he opened the mailbox, Arthur found a handwritten letter. The envelope was beige, simple, with the sender's stamp. Vienna Music Conservatory. He read the letter standing in the garden, his heart racing. The conservatory's director had seen the video of "We Came Home" and invited Samuel for a special performance. Part of an international project on music as the language of renewal. Arthur showed the letter to the boy, who widened his eyes and stayed silent for long seconds before asking, "Do you think I can do it?" "I don't think, Samuel, I know." The weeks that followed were filled with rehearsals, preparation, adjustments, but none of it was rushed. Everything was done with love, in Samuel's time, in the time of a child who didn't just want to impress, he wanted to touch hearts. The trip to Vienna was magical. The city's cold contrasted with the warmth emanating from their story. On the night of the performance, the theatre was packed, a refined, demanding audience. The orchestra was already in place. The conductor, a lanky man with a stern gaze, looked at Samuel with curiosity as he took the stage alone. The boy carried only his sheet music and the melody born of pain and love. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and began to play, and the world stopped. The music was an invisible bridge between distinct realities, between the pain of a lost boy and the miracle of being found, between the silence of a father barren of emotions and the birth of a family. Each note said something, each pause breathed hope, and when the final chord echoed through the gilded walls of that century-old hall, there was silence for a moment, the kind of silence that precedes the sacred. Then the applause came, standing, long, unrestrained. But Samuel didn't smile at the audience. He looked only at the front row, where Arthur and Luna sat with wet eyes. He smiled at them, at the only ones who truly needed to understand. Outside the theatre, a journalist approached. "What did you feel playing for the world?" she asked. Samuel thought for a few seconds and answered, "I just wanted my sister up there to hear it too." That response traveled the world. It made headlines, inspired documentaries, and sparked foundations for orphans. But Arthur protected his children from excess. He didn't want them to become symbols. He just wanted them to remain children. And so, he turned down record deals, reality show invitations, and sensationalist interviews. "My son isn't a miracle to be exploited," he said in a rare interview. "He's a miracle to be loved." Back home, their routine took on new meaning. Fame knocked insistently at the door, but it didn't cross the gate. Samuel and Luna returned to their classes, their books, the piano at the end of the hallway, and breakfasts filled with laughter and breadcrumbs. One night, Arthur found Luna sitting on the floor of her room, sorting through a box of toys. She looked pensive. "Is everything okay, my flower?" She looked at him with that gaze that seemed to carry more centuries than years. "Dad, do you think other kids like us dream of songs too?" "Of course they do. I think there are many kids who haven't sung yet, only because no one listened." Luna smiled and said, "Then we need to teach adults to listen." Arthur understood, and that same month, he launched a new project within Songhouse, the Listen to a Child program. In it, adult volunteers would spend entire afternoons just listening to the stories, dreams, fears, and desires of the children housed there. The project changed the Institute's dynamic. Many businessmen who once donated only money now came in person to listen. Some cried, others rewrote their own childhoods, and many children for the first time felt seen, not as numbers but as legitimate voices. In one of these sessions, a 6-year-old girl named Isadora said to a volunteer, "Today I existed." Those words spread across the country. They became a mural, a hymn, a commitment. Meanwhile, Luna and Samuel kept composing, now with help from other children at the Institute. The songs were recorded and distributed for free as part of a campaign called Songs for Those Forgotten, and on a sunny autumn afternoon, Arthur received an unexpected letter. It was from a man named Federico, a lawyer from the countryside. He claimed to be Samuel and Luna's biological father, but during the orphanage fire, he was mistakenly declared dead. He had been in a coma, undocumented, for 2 years. Upon waking, he tried to find his children but never succeeded. The letter was long, sincere, and asked for nothing. It only said, "I know you're their father now, and I'm grateful for that. I just want to see them from afar, maybe once. I don't want to interfere." Arthur was stunned. He checked the records, ordered tests. Everything matched. It was him. It was real. He thought for hours. He didn't know what to do. And then, the next night, he sat with Samuel and Luna and told them everything. Carefully, truthfully. They listened, with astonishing maturity. And in the end, Samuel asked, "Did he sing too?" Arthur laughed, moved. "I don't know, son, but maybe it's time to find out." The meeting was arranged for a quiet weekend at a secluded countryside estate, where nature spoke louder than any human noise. Arthur wanted it to be intimate, without spotlights, without external noise, without interference from the past. Just them, time, and the truth. On the appointed day, Frederico's car arrived in the morning, slowly climbing the dirt road lined with autumn golden trees. Samuel and Luna waited on the porch, holding hands, staring fixedly at the entrance gate, as if watching the approach of a silent destiny. Frederico stepped out of the car with a restrained step. He was a middle-aged man, his face marked not only by time, but by the losses accumulated in his eyes. He carried a small cloth bag and a hesitant look, as if afraid to take a wrong step and break something sacred. Arthur approached first. They shook hands with firmness and respect. There was no rivalry, no jealousy, only the shared awareness that two different worlds had loved the same children, each in their own way. "They're over there," Arthur said, nodding toward them. "But they'll only come closer if you're ready." Frederico nodded. He walked slowly to the porch bench. He stopped a few steps away and knelt. He stayed there, his eyes fixed on Samuel and Luna's, without a word. The children looked at him with curiosity and a kind of silent reverence. It was as if they intuited everything without needing translation. "I'm the man you dreamed of finding," he said at last, his voice breaking. "But I was saved by someone who dreamed before me." Luna walked to him. She touched his face with the palm of her hand. "Can we have two dads, right? One from before and one from now." "You can have everyone who loves you," Arthur replied, approaching and kneeling beside them. That afternoon, the four sat under the shade of a tree and opened the cloth bag Frederico had brought. Inside were old photos, a broken toy, and two crumpled children's drawings, a sun and a moon, made by the hands of Samuel and Luna when they were just 3 years old. Frederico had kept them all this time, even without knowing if he would ever find their creators. The silence there was the kind that heals. It wasn't uncomfortable or empty. It was presence. From that day on, Frederico visited his children often. He never intruded, never demanded. He simply added. He brought books, stories, their mother's recipes, old songs, and most importantly, he brought the certainty that he had been forgiven without needing to beg for it. Over time, Samuel began calling him Dad from before and Arthur Dad from now. Luna preferred to call him the uncle who sings softly. Each processed it in their own way, and Arthur allowed every name, every affection to flow as it should, without control, without possessiveness. Their family's story became a book, written by Luna with illustrations by the Institute's children, the title, The Song That Woke the Silence. It was distributed for free in public schools, libraries, and children's psychology clinics. Psychologists said the book helped traumatized children process their pain. Teachers used excerpts to start difficult conversations in class, and many families, after reading it, found the courage to start over. One day, Arthur was invited to receive an International Humanitarian Award in recognition of the Songhouse Project. The ceremony would be in Geneva. He hesitated. He didn't like the spotlight. But Luna said, with that look that understood adult souls, "You're not going for yourself. You're going for those still waiting to be heard." And he went. The speech he gave that night traveled the world, but it wasn't ornate or technical, it was simple. He began with a deliberate 20-second silence. Then he said, "That was the time my daughter waited for me to answer the phone in the hospital. 20 seconds, and I lost my last chance to hear her voice. Today I've learned that listening is more urgent than speaking. Listening to a child, listening to another's pain, listening to your own soul. And sometimes listening is enough to save a life." He received a standing ovation, but Arthur returned home without medals or vanity. He carried only a new certainty, that his story wasn't an end, but a starting point for others. New listeners, new parents, new homes needed to be formed. Back at the Institute, a new wing was inaugurated, the Invisible Music Room. There, children with severe trauma could express their emotions through instruments without needing to speak. It was as if sound were the language for those who didn't yet know how to name their wounds. One morning, while walking through the corridors, Arthur heard a new melody. It was delicate, improvised, full of pauses. He entered the room and saw a boy sitting alone at a xylophone. He had deep-set eyes and marks on his arms. No one knew his name. He hadn't spoken since being found in an alley 2 months earlier, but now he was playing. Arthur knelt beside him and whispered, "Does this music have a name?" The boy looked at him for the first time and answered softly, "Love." Arthur held back tears. He left the room and looked at the sky. He felt, as always, that his daughter was watching, and perhaps smiling. Time was no longer his enemy, it was his stage. Each day a new note, each rescued child a new verse, and the music that once carried pain now echoed with redemption. The world turned, but in Arthur's house time seemed to move to a different rhythm. There was a sacred calm between those walls, a silently miraculous routine. Samuel now composed entire melodies, some with lyrics, others just chords that seemed to converse with the heavens. Luna began painting faces of children she said she had never met, but who somehow knew her name in dreams. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes of old books, Luna found a worn, leather-bound diary. It was his daughter's diary. With wide eyes, she handed it to her father, who stood silent for a few minutes, holding the notebook as if it were a living flame. Upon opening the first page, his daughter's delicate handwriting read, "If someone finds this one day, please tell my dad I knew he loved me, even when he was silent." Arthur closed his eyes. That diary, which he had never had the courage to open, now fell into his hands like a seed sprouting after long winters. He spent the following days reading every page. Simple stories, childhood musings, notes about songs, small letters never delivered. But one page, in particular, undid him completely. It was a sheet with a single sentence. "Dad, when you can't sing anymore, find a child. They'll know the key." It was as if a window opened within him, as if his daughter had left secret instructions of love, written in invisible ink that only time and pain could reveal. That same week, Arthur wrote a letter to his daughter, but this time not to bury it, but to publish it. The letter became an editorial for a widely circulated magazine. The title, "A Song That Taught Me to Live Again." In it, he recounted his journey, but not in biographical details, in gestures, sensations, quiet miracles. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived from everywhere. People shared how they had reunited with their children, parents, siblings, grandchildren. A blind man wrote that after hearing the audio of Arthur's letter, he dreamed of his daughter for the first time in years. A terminally ill woman asked that "We Came Home" be played at her funeral, and left a note saying, "Now I can go in peace." And then came an unexpected invitation. The UN wanted Arthur to take the Songhouse project to war zones, refugee children, orphans from Syria, Ethiopia, Ukraine. It would be a pilot project, creating spaces for listening, art and care in places where everything had been destroyed, except hope. Arthur felt fear. It was an immense challenge, but looking at Samuel and Luna, he understood that was exactly where he needed to be. Because if love had reached two wounded little hearts, it could reach 1,000, 10,000, as many as could fit in the melody that came from God. The first trip was to a refugee camp on the Poland-Ukraine border. Samuel and Luna went along, with school permission and psychological support. They arrived with simple instruments, colored pencils, blank notebooks, and one certainty: no one is invisible when someone chooses to listen. Upon entering the shelter, they found dozens of huddled children, some without shoes, others without voices, but all with eyes asking for one thing: presence. Samuel began playing the portable piano, and Luna started drawing on the concrete floor. Slowly, one by one, the children approached, and then something extraordinary happened. An 8-year-old Ukrainian girl began singing in her language. The melody was unfamiliar, but the tone was the same as Samuel's song. It was as if two souls had found the same score written by celestial hands. That night, despite the war around them, despite the cold and scarcity, there was music, there was laughter, there was humanity. Arthur looked at it and understood. His daughter's song wasn't just a memory, it was a mission, an eternal seed, and now it was sprouting in the most unlikely deserts. In the following months, the project expanded to other nations. Samuel and Luna became voices for a silent generation. They didn't speak with speeches, they spoke with art, with compassion, with listening. Back in Brazil, Songhouse became a global reference for effective care. It received visits from educators from Europe, Asia, Africa. Many came expecting a technological center, but they left impacted by something far simpler and far more powerful: people listening to others with their hearts. One morning, a boy named Raphael arrived at the institute. He was 9 years old, with green eyes and a gaze that didn't match his age. Silent, isolated. He carried a small notebook where he drew triangles, houses, and bars. On the first day, he spoke to no one. On the second, he watched a storytelling circle from afar. On the third, when Arthur entered the room, he saw Raphael with his notebook open, drawing a staircase that rose from a dark basement to a sky full of stars. Arthur knelt beside him. "Where does this staircase lead?" Raphael looked at him for a moment and answered, "To where the sound is." Arthur smiled. "Want to show me the sound?" Raphael nodded. In the next room, there was a xylophone, a small guitar, and a drum. Raphael played the drum. With rhythm, with strength, with soul. Each beat was like a cry finally finding a way to exist. Arthur turned on the recorder, and that day, a new track was born for the album Songs for Those Forgotten. When Luna heard it, she said, "This sound is from someone who survived." And Arthur thought to himself, maybe every pain is a note, and maybe together we're composing the most beautiful love song ever heard. Spring arrived like a whisper from God. The trees on the street where Songhouse stood were covered in lilac flowers, and mornings were punctuated by the sounds of children laughing, leaves swaying in the wind, and the timid chords of a piano tested by small hands. There was a gentle beauty hovering over everything, as if nature too understood that this place was sacred ground. Arthur woke early every day. He made coffee for his children and insisted on eating with them at the table, even when his schedule was full. That was a silent rule. Presence before commitments. Samuel was now 12 and Luna was 10. Still young, but with souls marked by experiences many adults would never comprehend. That month, the Institute received a visit from a documentary filmmaker renowned for his work on childhood and trauma. He had been moved by Arthur's letters published years earlier and wanted to capture not just the story of the man and his children, but the essence of that place where pain was transformed into art. Arthur hesitated at first. He feared the mission's shine would be dimmed by the vanity of being recorded. But Luna was firm, as always. "Let them show it. There are people out there waiting for a song only we can play." Filming began in silence. Nothing was rehearsed. No scenes were staged. The filmmaker simply walked the corridors with his lightweight camera, capturing the ordinary that was, in fact, extraordinary. A Syrian girl teaching a song to a Haitian boy, a group of teens painting with their eyes closed, a blind child playing the xylophone with her feet. And then came the day of Arthur's interview. Seated in the worn leather armchair in his office, with the late afternoon light casting shadows on the walls, he answered a single question. "What made you change?" Arthur fell silent. He breathed, looked at his daughter's photo on the shelf, and said, "I heard a song in the middle of my grief, and I realized it wasn't a farewell. It was a call." The documentary was titled The Call of the Song, and when it was released, it went viral in an almost inexplicable way. Not for the production, not for the faces, but for the raw lyrical truth it contained. It was like a modern psalm, a hymn of hope for wounded times. At the premiere, held in a theater in the capital, Samuel and Luna performed a new song, composed especially for that night. The lyrics said, "You don't need a stage to be heard, you just need someone willing to listen." The audience rose in tears. Many left embracing strangers. It was as if the song had made everyone there remember their own forgotten pains, and the urgency of healing them with love. And so the invitations kept coming, but Arthur declined many. He preferred tending to his garden over collecting awards in lavish halls. He said, "The mission isn't to be remembered but to remind others who they are." But one ordinary afternoon, a different invitation arrived, a request to participate in a collective adoption ceremony. The government had created a program inspired by Songhouse, based on one of its most revolutionary principles: adopting is listening before teaching. At the ceremony, families from different states were about to adopt children in vulnerable situations, and Arthur was invited to be the symbolic godfather of the moment. Upon arriving, he noticed something that chilled him. Among the attendees was the judge, who had denied Samuel's adoption years ago, citing a lack of family ties. The man, now retired, had teary eyes. When he saw Arthur, he stood, approached, and with humility said, "I was wrong. Back then I saw numbers. Today I hear songs." Arthur hugged him, because forgiving was also part of the song. At the ceremony, each child received a small musical instrument as a symbol of their new journey. A 6-year-old girl held a flute, a 7-year-old boy a harmonica, and when the new family's names were called, a song began playing in the background. We came home. Samuel, watching from the audience, squeezed Arthur's hand tightly. "She's still singing, Dad, in all of them." Arthur nodded, his eyes welling up, and replied, "She never stopped." On the way home, Luna, exhausted, fell asleep in the back seat. Samuel looked out the window, pensive, and then, without looking at his father, said, "You still miss her every day, don't you?" Arthur didn't answer right away, but then he murmured, "Yes, and I think I always will." Samuel said something Arthur would never forget, "But now she lives in us, and every time we love someone new, it's like she sings again." Arthur parked the car. He sat there for a moment, watching the two sleep. The boy who reconnected him with life, the girl who painted the sky with words. He thought of everything he had lost and everything he had gained, and he realized that, though time takes some things away, the song of life always finds a way to play again. Years had passed since that first encounter on the sidewalk, when Arthur offered lunch to an orphan boy singing his daughter's song. Now, that memory felt like a divine seed, planted in the cracked soil of his heart, and which had blossomed into a garden that sheltered many other lives. It was a sunny morning when Luna appeared in the office with an idea in hand. She had drawn a children's book, with illustrations and simple phrases, inspired by her memories with Samuel, her father, and the sister she never met, but always felt close to. The title was direct and disarming, When Love Sang Again. Arthur leafed through the draft carefully. Each page was a universe, a child crossing the rain alone, a sad man hearing a song in the wind, and finally, a hug that made all wounds disappear. "It's beautiful," Arthur said, his eyes shining. "Do you want it published?" "I want it to be read by those who've never heard a song before." Her words echoed in his mind for days, and so he decided. The book would be printed and distributed for free in underserved communities, orphanages, and pediatric hospitals. Luna and Samuel recorded the audio version. With background music they composed themselves, and when the first copies arrived, the response was unexpected. Children who had never been moved by a story now asked to reread the same page 3-4 times, and then came a special invitation to present the book at a women's prison. Most of the inmates were mothers, separated from their children. At first, Arthur hesitated. How could such a sweet story be read in a place so marked by pain? But Luna replied, "That's where the song needs to go most." On the appointed day, the Songhouse team entered the prison with boxes of books and small musical instruments. The women watched them with suspicion. Some hid their faces, others frowned. But when Samuel began to play, everything changed. There were no lyrics, just melody. And the melody said it all. Luna read the story calmly, with emotion. And when she finished, one of the inmates, who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, stood and asked, "Do you think my son can still love me?" Luna stepped off the makeshift stage. She hugged the woman and whispered, "If the sound of your voice still lives in his heart, he's never forgotten you." From that day on, Songhouse created a listening wing inside the prison. Women began writing letters to their children with lyrics of songs they learned there. Some reunions happened. Others remained only in hope, but the important thing was that hope existed. One night after one of these events, Arthur was sitting on his porch with a cup of tea and a blanket over his legs. Samuel arrived with his guitar and sat beside him. He played a few notes. They stayed in silence. "Dad, sometimes I think you still live in fear of losing everything again." Arthur looked at his son. There was so much truth in that sentence. And then he replied, "It's not fear of losing. It's fear of forgetting to be grateful." Samuel smiled, and together there in the warm darkness of the night they began composing a new song, one that needed no words, just chords, the melody of gratitude, of presence, of today. The next morning, Arthur received a registered letter with an unknown sender. Inside, just a note. "Thank you for listening to my daughter when I couldn't." There was no signature, but with it was a woven bracelet with the letter A. Arthur understood. Someone else who had lost. Someone who somehow found redemption in seeing him start again. At Songhouse, the walls were being filled with drawings from children around the world. It was as if that place, planted in the heart of a lonely man, had become the meeting point for the planet's orphaned souls. Arthur was no longer called Sir by anyone there. He was just Dad, Uncle Arthur, the man with the long hug. Luna began teaching illustration workshops for autistic children. Samuel gave piano lessons to at-risk teens, and together they created a festival called Song of Silence where no music was performed live, just listened to through headphones by those who wanted to hear it in peace, with their eyes closed. And at one of those festival nights, a 5-year-old girl from the countryside who had never spoken a word in her life took off her headphones, pointed to the sky and said, "She's singing up there." Arthur cried. Everyone cried. It was as if the daughter who had passed was now present in every detail, in the fingers touching the keys, in the voices whispering melodies, in the hands holding other hands tightly. And so, a new project was born. Samuel named it Invisible Bridges. It would be a global network of homes that not only sheltered orphaned children, but taught adults to become homes, human homes, places of listening, spaces of redemption. Arthur knew he might not live to see the project complete, but he was at peace, because he understood he had done the essential, answered the call of the song. It was a golden morning when Arthur woke earlier than usual. The sun filtered through the curtains with an almost ceremonial gentleness, as if even the light knew that day carried something special. He went downstairs quietly, walking slowly to the garden where, years ago, he had buried his daughter's ashes. The tree there was now lush, its leaves dancing to the sound of a gentle breeze from the east. He carried an envelope in his hands, inside a final letter, not written with pain or longing, but with gratitude. A letter of closure, of a completed circle. He sat before the tree, took a deep breath and read aloud, even knowing the words didn't need to cross the air to reach their destination. My daughter, today I don't write to apologize, but to say thank you for visiting me in the form of a song, for giving me Samuel, for painting the sky with Luna's eyes, for turning my guilt into a mission and my pain into a song. You taught me that love doesn't die, it changes form, it spreads, it multiplies. Today, my heart isn't a tomb, it's a temple, and in it, you sing every day. He folded the letter, placed it in a small wooden box, and nestled it among the roots that had grown with time, as silences grow into prayers. Upon returning home, he found Luna preparing coffee and Samuel tuning the piano. The sound of the strings filled the air with lightness, and for the first time in a long while, Arthur felt something beyond the idea of happiness. He felt redemption. He was home, within himself, within them. That day, they would inaugurate the new Songhouse headquarters, a school of arts and humanity, built with donations from hundreds of people touched by their story. A place where children, teens, and adults could not only learn music, painting, theater, or dance, but also learn to listen, to themselves, to others, to life. At the ceremony, children from 17 countries were present. Each held a symbolic instrument in their hands. Luna gave a speech with simple but firm words. We're not here to show talent. We're here because one day someone listened to our souls, and now we want to listen to others. Samuel then took the stage with his guitar. He looked at his father, smiled, and began playing a new composition. The melody blended notes from the original song with new chords. It was as if the music had matured, grown with them. As he played, images were projected on a screen, real scenes from their journey. The lunch on the sidewalk, the song on the porch, the adoption, the drawings, the letters, the hugs, the tears, the seeds, the fruits. And when the final chord faded, a minute of silence was proposed. But not an empty silence. It was a silence full of invisible sounds, a silence where everyone could hear something different, the memory of a hug, the echo of a farewell, the voice of someone gone, or the call of something new being born. Arthur stood through the silence, and at the end he said just one sentence. Life sang again. That night, after the ceremony, the house was filled with flowers, children running, voices mingling in dozens of languages. But Arthur stepped away for a few minutes. He went to the studio beside the living room and sat at the piano. He played alone without sheet music, eyes closed, a soft, almost imperceptible melody. Luna entered without making a sound. She sat beside him. Then came Samuel. No words were spoken. Just the three of them gathered around the music, and when they finished playing, Luna rested her head on her father's shoulder and said, "She's smiling now, isn't she?" Arthur didn't answer. But in that moment, he felt something far greater than words could describe. A presence, a certainty. The daughter who had passed wasn't the past. She was a living presence in every act of love, in every child welcomed, in every note played. Days later, while walking through the garden, he found a note hanging on his daughter's tree. It had been placed there by one of the Institute's children. Written in trembling letters, it read, "When I grow up, I want to be a home, like you." Arthur read it and smiled, because in the end that's what he had become, a home, a shelter with legs, a man who once thought himself barren of affection, now a father to many, a man who lost everything, but found in a song the path back home. And that early morning, as the city slept and the winds played with the garden leaves, Arthur looked at the sky, saw a shooting star cross the firmament, and whispered softly, "Thank you for singing. I heard you."